Hello and welcome to the Hypertrophy Odyssey, chapter 377. It is the third day of the week, aka the Spirit Bomb workout. I'm feeling very good right now, very excited for this workout. But anyways, to the main subject matter for today, identity crisis. So the main reason why I wanted to discuss this is because this is on my list. I think I briefly mentioned it somewhere. I don't know when I mentioned it, probably in a previous episode. I don't know where. But I've mentioned the idea of the identity crisis. I think there are people, generally speaking, I have discussed the quarter century crisis, I believe, right here, where you turn 25. I think. I'm pretty sure it's that one. I haven't talked about midlife yet. But I think that the identity crisis is something that happens to everybody. Obviously, this isn't necessarily just a one person thing, but I think a lot of people get it in different places in life. This isn't necessarily just a one at one point, like once your frontal lobe is, done growing, or halfway point of life, or if you live to 100 or whatever. This one is more of a just identifying with who you are, really. And I think that this is one of those things that it's better to go through it early in life than later in life. So literally, the entire cringe idea of like, it's not a phase, mom. It probably is a phase, but it's better to go through that phase when it's in high school or at least younger, because a lot of people don't end up doing that. And then thus they end up having this identity crisis later in life, in which case it is probably worse for them. But we'll talk more about that later. I think I'll say this before that. Identity crisis in general can really affect anybody. It's one of those things that I don't think anybody's immune to it. There are certain people that have never really gone through it, but then again, there are probably the same people who probably don't even have an inner monologue in their brain, but it's a whole other subject for a whole other day. It's just an interesting thing to see whenever somebody might not know what their identity in this world is. So we're going to be looking at that, what might cause it, some solutions to it, because, obviously, if you're going through that, good luck. It's just to talk about it because it's a very interesting thing, at least in my brain, about these types of things, especially nowadays where people are so one note or extreme with their identity, especially because of the internet and all that other stuff. I also don't mean identity in a I identify as they, them, and all that other stuff. No. That is pseudo-intellectual garbage that I will not touch upon here. I'm talking about the actual person, the self, not that ridiculousness, because that's a whole other story. I'm not going to talk about that. But with that being said, I will see you at Mother Base. All right, so started this day off with 80 press, which was pretty good. But anyways, back to the main subject matter at hand. Identity crisis. So the main reason I wanted to discuss this is because this came up randomly, probably in a tweet or something like that, but it is something that happens quite frequently with a lot of people. Now, in today's age, unfortunately, these types of things have been bastardized, or at least simplified to the point where it is not really an identity crisis, but what you outwardly put into the world crisis. It's kind of weird. It's like there is a certain level of identity that you put on to the outside facing world, but for some people that's all that they put out there, and that's kind of a different crisis for a different day. This is more of the general idea of it, because trying to find who you are as a person is a little bit of a harder task when you are actually honest with yourself. And I think that that's the big thing. Honesty with the self is something that is very rare, but that's for a different story for a different day. I think that what mostly causes it is just truly not knowing who you are. And obviously this just happens through life. As time progresses, you find yourself a little bit more and more, and find out things and how you would interact and how you would deal with things throughout life, and thus creating an identity for the self. But most of the time it happens when you're younger, where these things that you go through kind of help you shape your identity within the world itself. But because of things like social media and the internet, there are people who prey on others and take advantage of the fact that they do not know themselves, and thus prey on them, and then
all of a sudden they are a warped reality version of what they want to project onto the person. So that's the part that kind of sucks, because then they really don't know. And then realistically, a lot of the times people will attach themselves to the version of themselves that they find, quote, the best of themselves, or what they want to face outward in the world, but in reality are too afraid to be 100% honest with what they are doing in their life, and will not change no matter how much the world would need them or want them to change, whether it be in the macro or even in the micro. They'd rather stay stuck within their ways of what they have some weird nostalgic like callback to what they were like when they were 15, and just stick there until they are dead, basically, rather than realizing that there's changes that have to happen and evolving and things like that. Because getting rid of what is ostensibly yourself, but for a better or greater version of yourself, is something that they cannot do. And it sucks in a certain sense, because you can't really do anything about these people. These people are basically like dead trees. They're hollow on the inside. The outside is just a former shell of what they once were. Realistically, these people should metaphorically burn themselves, so that way that only thing that's left is the strong-willed core, and thus they can rebuild themselves afterwards. But a lot of the times they're not willing to do that, because that means representing or letting go of their former self, and that might be too much of a radical change for them, to the point where it might warp their perception. But the thing is, their perception is already warped because they are rotten to the core. They have to kind of destroy that. But a lot of people don't want to do that, because that means that they have to get rid of themselves. And it's understandable, because when you're playing with stuff like that, going into yourself and really realizing what is the good and bad of you, the shadow work or the behind the scenes aspects of yourself, is not an easy thing to do. But we do it early in life subconsciously. I think it's out later in life that we should do it consciously. So then that way you can become a better version, or at least a more balanced version, rather than allowing something like your inner identity or the shadow of yourself kind of control you from the shadows, really. I think that the biggest thing to do, if you ever not really knowing who the hell you are, or having the crisis of who am I, is really to look at yourself and try to figure out where you stand on certain aspects of certain things, and or what is good and evil in your brain, and what would you consider those types of things, and making some type of code and or some type of identity that you can base your entire life upon. It doesn't have to necessarily be one hobby or thing or particular person or religion even. It doesn't necessarily have to be that thing, because it doesn't have to just be a one note type of deal, because there are a lot of people who will go one note on many of these things, but it's not like that. It's like a layering of a nice croissant, where you get each layer as you fold the dough over and over again, until you create something that is powerful and or at least something that is layered together to create something that is bigger than the one layer itself. Because a lot of people become one note because they get stuck in whatever rut that they believe that they have to be in for whatever reason. And that's why you get people that you just kind of hate, because they become one fucking note. But I think that finding yourself is not the craziest thing, but you have to be willing to sacrifice your old self in order to get something better. The worst thing that you could possibly do is try to find yourself within someone else. That is a completely bad idea for a lot of different reasons, but that's for a different story for a different day.
And we're back. Welcome to the workout debriefing. Exercises not filmed, none. Exercises skipped, also none. Got everything in, thankfully. But anyways, to the main subject matter at hand today. Identity crisis. So the main reason why I wanted to discuss this is because this seems to be an ongoing thing. I think more people are slowly but surely going through this because they never went through it earlier in life, as well as there's some people that go way too early in life through it, and thus they've kind of entangled themselves to the point where they are basically become that that person, the shadow of themselves, or a figment of their own imagination in a sense. But hopefully I've covered that in the voiceover. And I don't mean this in the who am I, in the shallow terms that a lot of people see it nowadays, where your gender identity or things like that, because that is not even close to anything deeper than surface level. Those who believe that it is all they aren't really that deep people, and you should probably take heedance on these types of people. Make sure that you stay far away from them because they are probably rotten, but that's kind of a different story for a different day. In this case, I'm talking about particularly just knowing who you are as you, who I know who I am as me, but it took years, and I wouldn't say that I would have known myself since maybe 30, I want to say, is really when I got basically most of who I am down. And now I understand it, but it takes a lot of reflection, a lot of sitting down and looking at yourself and realizing all of your flaws and looking at it and really dissecting what goes into making you as a person. And it's a tough task because sometimes you have to get rid of the tough parts of you that seem like they are part of you, but realistically they're just holding you down, or they're just old parts of you that are holding on to something that shouldn't even be held on to at this point. So it is an interesting thing because when it comes to identity, who we are as a person, a lot of people you see kind of going through like a cycle or a crisis or like something along the lines where they're trying to grab from other people to become their own person, but they end up becoming an amalgamation of a being, really, where you don't really trust them because they never seem actually genuine. And that's the main reason why I wanted to talk about it, is because when people get into this identity crisis, there is the genuine factor that always goes missing with these people. And I think that that's the main thing. As long as you're genuine as a person, most people can understand it. And at least if you're a genuine asshole, there is some room of forgiveness that can happen in such a case, because people would rather a genuine asshole than a snake, a fake snake, for example. So that is why I think most people would rather be upfront about certain things than, behind the back, but obviously. And I think that this isn't even like everybody could agree on this. I don't think there's any real sides on this, People who have this identity crisis have to deal with basically never being genuine to themselves, but also being never genuine to the outside world, which is also a mistake, because realistically, some of the world can and will take advantage of those people because they know that their lack of genuine self is able to be easily manipulated. And thus, that's why you see certain people going down rabbit holes that they probably shouldn't be going down, because they themselves are not a strong enough self, because they never finished the job. They went surface level and decided to say, no, we are not going any further, because if you go any further, then you're going to have to deal with the traumas of the world that has been inflicted upon you. And people don't want to deal with that bullshit, obviously. Come on now. Instead, they will just do the surface level things and call it a day. That's why a lot of these things are not as easy as 1, 2, 3, but at the same time, they kind of are. Most of the time, people just don't want to face the realities of their own situations. And that's the hardest part, really, is being self-reflective as much as humanly possible and realize when things are going bad and when things are going good. And objectively, when those things are going bad and good. Because we've learned at least a little bit, or at least have systems in place in order to show what is good and what is bad. But that's for the Good and Evil series. Well, with that being said, though, tell me what you think in the comment section down below. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions about this one. This one was sort of random, but still something that is very interesting to me nonetheless. Please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. If you ever went through a phase, please let me know in the comment section down below. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Please share this video with anybody who may or may not like it. I will be back on tomorrow with a new video. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I will see you in the next one. Keep it heavy. Stay safe out there. Stay cool. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.